point of these little videos, these shorter ones, are to explore ideas that cross my mind that I think are worth exploring. And if they're rattling around in my head, there's a good chance it might be rattling in someone else's head too. They're certainly not hills that I want to die on, but I think when it comes to faith, there are things that we tend to gloss over that maybe we ought to pause and examine a little more closely. And so one of those things occurred in the last, couple of weeks, although this thought has bubbled up to the surface many times over my career. And I don't think I've ever really preached on it at all, but it has crossed my mind more than once. I'll put it that way. And it's simply this. Jesus made the point that the greatest of all the commandments is to love the Lord our God with all our soul, strength, mind, body, all of that. But then he says this stunning second statement, and the second is like it. He says, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, we distill that down in the modern church as love God, love people, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. I think that's a great, almost mantra to have at a local church level. Now, of course, you got to figure out what that means for your context. But part of that statement, I think we just run right past. We don't even look at it. Yes, we're supposed to love our neighbor, but it implies, or it points out, that we're also supposed to love ourselves. Now, I think we got to be really careful here, because the sense that I have is that we don't want to love ourselves because we think that's selfish. And I get that. I am prone to pride and selfishness as much as anybody else, believe me. But at the same time, if you don't have a certain love for yourself as a created being, as one made by a loving Heavenly Father, I'm quickly coming to the conclusion, I'm not sure you're even able to love someone else. And if I'm not mistaken, we're talking about agape. That's that Greek word for love, which is the divine sort of self-sacrificing, but certainly that all-encompassing love. How on earth can you possibly love another person, agape another person, if you don't agape yourself? And I think this is really important, because the one thing that I find in the American church, almost more than anything else, is shame. And of course, shame is not remorse for something you've done. That's guilt. Shame is remorse for who you are. And if you're buried in toxic levels of shame, that belief that you are just fundamentally flawed and without redemption, that doesn't seem to be agape to me. And remember, this is just kind of some ramblings on this. I don't have this fully developed yet. But the other piece of that puzzle is, I think that one of the big ideas, at least in church going forward, is this notion of identity. And I think one of the reasons why we do not agape ourselves, and therefore not agape others, hinges largely on this idea that we don't know who we are. And I've talked about this before, a couple of times, that I graduated seminary not knowing who I was and how I didn't know how to hear the Lord. I mean, those are two pretty important things. But moreover, it's not a seminary issue. Again, it's a church thing, an issue the church needs to address, because we cannot legitimately love others if we don't love ourselves? And I don't mean to substitute that with selfishness or anything like that. I mean legitimate, oh, good heavens, the Lord made me like this, and I'm excited to be that person that He's created me to be. So I'm not sure how that strikes you today, but I want to encourage you to think about that deeply. Because we will almost always default to self-protection and self-promotion, which is not love, which is not agape, if we don't know who we are and we don't love that person that God has created us to be. So I think there's some fundamental implications to all of that church, we need to talk about and we need to wrestle through. And you may disagree, and that's fine, but I think there is something very deep and very fundamental about our faith that we are, like I said, just sprinting past without a second thought. And it may be causing us a lot more problems than we realize. So, tell me what you think. Grace and peace.